Hi everyone, my name is Adrienne and I'm here to share some of my thoughts on the North and South miniseries and Elizabeth Gaskell's original novel. I've been thinking a lot about North and South in the past year, and one of the things that has interested me as I think about this story is how the driving narrative of class struggle manifests itself not only in the obvious labor plot, but also in the romantic plot. I'm excited to share some of it with you and hear your own thoughts. Here's what we'll talk about today. First, what's my interest in North and South and why this topic? Second, I want to talk about the social upheaval we see happening at the beginning of the series, especially through the character of Margaret Hale. Third, I'd like to talk about the concept of gentleman and why it is brought up so often by a variety of characters. Then, how do we as a modern audience relate to Mr. Thornton, who may be an unsympathetic figure in our modern context? And finally, what do we think Gaskell is trying to tell us? You'll see on the screen here some screenshots of some memes and letterbox reviews that are relevant. The BBC's 2004 adaptation of Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South was a surprise hit. The popularity of the serial was felt when the BBC message boards were totally unprepared for the level of interest shown by viewers wanting to discuss the show. The servers were overwhelmed and crashed the night of the first episode. During the first lockdown in my state in 2020, I was revisiting comforting favorites, Jane Austen novels and their adaptations mostly. And while interneting, I came across the meme on the left, which is a Goodreads review of the novel. The person gave it 4 out of 5 stars and said it's Pride and Prejudice for socialists. So I was totally intrigued by that, thought it really funny. And I decided to look it up and saw that there was a miniseries. So I watched that first before I read the book. I checked it out, the DVD, out from a local library because it wasn't streaming anywhere. And it just completely shook me. These letterbox reviews are sort of representative of not only my feelings for the miniseries, but also the contemporary love and amusement people have for it, and by extension, the original novel. I'm actually surprised to see that the BBC didn't know how big of a hit that this would be, or couldn't anticipate that it would be a big hit. We can see now, I think, exactly why viewers liked it so much. It has so many of the tropes that we have come to expect from the best period dramas. The chemistry between two antagonistic love interests, the brushing of hands loaded with off-the-chart sexual tension, the intense score, the costumes, and of course, the number one thing we look for in a period drama, class warfare. I'm only partially kidding. Class dynamics are often overt plot devices in many period romances and costume dramas. It's a pretty standard trope to have the high class, low class binary as a source of conflict for characters. However, the novel and the 2004 adaptation of North and South take this and kick it up to 100. We have a narrative about two different people whose values and understanding and place in the world seem to be at odds with each other. And then we have this parallel narrative of literal class struggle, workers battling mill owners for better pay, exerting their agency within the capitalist profit over people model of the cotton mills. But what I would like to highlight today is how Margaret Hale and Mr. Thornton are also locked in a negotiation of their class positioning, and how this romance at the center of the story is as much about class struggle as a strike plot. Basically, as the letterbox review from Banana Hit says, this is so hot, class struggle is so hot. So what's Margarets Deal? Why is she so snobby and resistant to this new place and some of its people? Mr. Hale's decision to leave the church destabilizes the class standing of the Hales. They are now going to live in genteel poverty, with Mr. Hale needing to take on tutoring work to support the family. They move to Milton, a place that represents a new emerging social order. Margaret Hale is by birth a member of the British aristocracy, however much at the bottom she may be. Her father was considered a gentleman by virtue of his profession as a person. And Mrs. Hale, Gaskell tells us that Mrs. Hale is from a family whose parents were titled. That means that her mother held the title of a lady and her father was a sir, so probably a baronet or something. So they have all of this to hold on to as they relocate to a new town. But Milton, which is based on the real Manchester of Elizabeth Gaskell's time, is a place that is moving rapidly towards the future and towards a new social hierarchy. And so the people of Milton don't generally care too much about the Hales and their gentility, as we kind of see through the character of Mrs. Thornton, who sort of kind of brushes them off. Mr. Thornton is part of the new class of wealthy manufacturers with growing influence in society, especially in the northern industrial towns. Mr. Thornton's wealth was accrued through what Gaskell in the miniseries portray as a noble story arc, Thornton tells us he is young when his father dies, and he is forced out of school and into earning money for his family and to repay his father's debt. He rises above his station to become a successful manufacturer through hard work and frugality. Readers and viewers alike are meant to respect Mr. Thornton for his tenacity. Margaret Hale, however, is still holding on to the old aristocratic ways of thinking about people's social class. She does not want to associate with what she thinks of as shoppy people, that is, people who have to make or sell goods for money. But when she arrives to Milton, those that are considered equal to her gentility are the wealthy manufacturers, such as the Thorntons. Although Mr. Thornton is employing Mr. Hale as a tutor, he is also welcoming the Hales into his social circle, as we see through him asking Mrs. Thornton to visit the Hales, invite them to dinner, and he takes tea with them. Margaret is a natural object of desire almost instantly for Mr. Thornton, not just based on her beauty and compassion and expressiveness, but because he can aspire to her due to his elevated social standing. During the scenes where Mr. Thornton is taking tea with the Hales, Mr. Thornton says he and Margaret might get along better if they understand each other's traditions better. However, this is not just a matter of different traditions. It's a total upheaval of how Margaret understands the world. She refuses to shake Mr. Thornton's hand. She's unfamiliar with the custom, but she is also rejecting this new social order, at least when it comes to Thornton. She does not feel exactly the same way about the Higgins family, who she actually befriends. As the daughter of a parson, Margaret would be involved with making baskets for the poor and supporting those in need. Her relationship to those beneath her social class was more paternalistic. Nicholas and Bessie Higgins are adamant that Margaret not view them like that. They do not want her baskets. They do not want her charity. Her friendship with the Higgins family, a working family far beneath her in social standing, is one site where we have a little bit of class renegotiation. Part of Mr. Thornton's jealousy is that Margaret seems willing to allow this relationship while still viewing him as beneath her. So Milton is a strange place because it allows for the mixing of social classes. Margaret has the freedom that she did not have growing up in London and has many different kinds of people to associate with that she did not have in the South, allowing for this renegotiation of relationship between people in different classes to take place. It is no coincidence that some of the most satisfying moments in the series involve the erosion of class prejudice. When Margaret shakes Mr. Thornton's hand for the first time, it is a moment that is imbued with sexual tension that also serves as a slight release of some of the class tension that's been brewing between them. Both of these elements make the handshake electric. The novel gives us a little more insight into Margaret's thoughts. It's actually the first time she sees Mr. Thornton as attractive because he's in his element. And afterwards, she acknowledges in this quote to her father that she is finding the Milton manufacturers, and Thornton by extension, worthy of her regard. So she tells her father, he is the first specimen of a manufacturer, of a person engaged in trade that I had ever the opportunity of studying, Papa. He is my first olive. Let me make a face while I swallow it. I know he is good of his kind, and by I shall like the kind. I rather think I am already beginning to do so. So she just spent this dinner party with them. In the novel, it's a little bit less contentious than it is dramatized in the miniseries, but she's really starting to understand that society is shifting a little bit, right? That the Milton manufacturers have social power that is actually earned, which I think intrigues her. And interests her rather than the power of the gentility, which is just given to them by birth and not really earned in any way. However, Margaret is not entirely on board with this new social structure. The riot happens and we see a merging of the parallel plots. The romance collides with the labor plot. Margaret has to implore Mr. Thornton to face the rioters, quote, like a man instead of inflicting violence on them. This is an interesting word choice on Margaret's part that we'll explore more as we talk about the proposal. Margaret's actions at the riot imply to others that she cares about Mr. Thornton, and Mrs. Thornton encourages Mr. Thornton to do his duty in proposing to her. Mr. Thornton speaks about not being good enough for Margaret. In a sense, he is right. He must know Margaret is still thinking about the world and him through her old understanding of class structure. Everyone is on a different page here. Mr. Thornton is willing to take a chance in asking her because he loves her, and Margaret is seeing the situation from a totally different perspective in a way that is still trying to maintain her understanding of class. It's a recipe for disaster. In the heated proposal, Margaret makes her most overt reference to the disrupted class structure that allows for Mr. Thornton to even dream to aspire to her, when she accuses him of thinking he can buy her with his wealth because her father is in reduced circumstances. His wealth and her father's poverty put them on equal footing. In fact, the match makes a great deal of sense for both of them. For him, he would secure a genteel wife, which only furthers his social standing, and she would be financially secure. I don't think this is Mr. Thornton's reason for proposing to her. He is infatuated with her at this point and feels genuine affection for her. But I do think it's what Margaret thinks he's thinking, because Margaret is still thinking in terms of this old social hierarchy that she believes he is trying to elevate himself through. Margaret is not motivated by reasons of financial security and totally rejects this offer. She's offended by his assumption that her actions during the riot were about her feelings for him as a man, as an individual to another individual, instead of an action taken from her general sense of duty as a woman. She thinks a gentleman would understand her actions. In the text of the original novel, Gaskell gives us more insight into the source of these comments from Margaret. The chapter with the Thornton dinner party, in which Margaret and Mr. Thornton shake hands for the first time, we previously discussed it as a moment charged with sexual tension in the miniseries. That chapter is actually titled Men and Gentlemen, signaling that Gaskell would like her readers to pay attention to this concept. I would have titled it Mr. Thornton and Margaret Shake Hands. But anyway, Margaret and Mr. Thornton spend most of the evening admiring each other from afar. Margaret admits that she has never seen Mr. Thornton to such an advantage and is impressed with the power of all the Milton manufacturers. It's the first time she seems to not only sense but understand the shifting social power away from the unearned power gained from birth to the earned power gained through work. Mr. Thornton spends the evening knowing exactly where she is without looking at her too much. They have a brief conversation. Mr. Thornton asks Margaret whether she agreed with R, meaning the manufacturer's side of a discussion that happened, and Margaret wonders if one of the men who came up in the conversation was a gentleman. Mr. Thornton says he can't answer her question because he doesn't know what she means. He then tells her that the term gentleman is limiting because it focuses on a man's relationship to fellow men. In other words, where a man stands in the traditional social hierarchy of Victorian society. Thornton then discusses the idea of just a man, which he says is higher and completer than a gentleman because the idea of a man includes a person's relationship to himself, to life, and to his place in time and history. In other words, Mr. Thornton believes in the idea of a man different from the social structures that Margaret and the aristocratic Victorian society she belongs to, a man who can be measured by his strength, his faith, and his endurance. The short exchange is interrupted before we can hear Margaret's thoughts on this. Ultimately, though, what we have here is Mr. Thornton asking Margaret to consider him now not under her old ways of thinking, but in terms of his new, more universalist ways of thinking about a man. However, when the proposal happens, like 2 days later, she has not allowed for this renegotiation to happen. After Mr. Thornton further proves himself to her by continuing to treat her and her family well, even after her rejection, after she starts seeing who he is as a person, she does end up defending him to her brother, saying that he's not a tradesman, he's a manufacturer, which there's a distinction she makes there, and a gentleman. So eventually she starts taking in his idea about a man being more important, but she's still kind of tied to this language of gentleman versus man, and what is a tradesman, what is a manufacturer. So she's still sort of working through all these ideas of who Mr. Thornton is and how he fits into her thinking of the world. And she's going to struggle with that until she starts letting go of her way of thinking of the world, which is now going to become old-fashioned, and we know kind of sort of loses out. We don't really have that class structure in the same way that Margaret was living in it. So eventually she's going to have to rethink the way she's thinking about the world, which will actually allow for her to accept Mr. Thornton romantically. So in many ways, Mr. Thornton represents the fantasy of a compassionate capitalist who will treat his workers well because it is good for business. Maybe like me, you were also yelling at Margaret to not marry him until he treats his employees better. In the novel, Gaskell has Thornton say that he is not hopeful that better relationships between people of different classes will lead to the end of strikes. So 167 years after the publication of North and South, we still see these same class struggles kind of playing out. We have CEOs with an obscene amount of wealth, with employees who work long hours at minimum wage and unhealthy work conditions. Some of the biggest companies in the world are preventing workers from unionizing. So it surprises me that Mr. Thornton can be such a sympathetic figure and a romantic hero for an audience in 2021. Certainly Richard Armitage's nuanced depiction of him helps. And Gaskell's writing of Thornton gives us an insight to what he is trying to do, and that he's always trying to do the right thing. But Gaskell was writing a social problem novel that still resonates today because we still have similar renegotiation of class, similar conflict even in the US, where our class structure is complicated both by racism and the denial of existence of class, although we do have a class structure in the US. So I think Mr. Thornton is only somewhat, or is a sympathetic figure for a 2021 audience because of the fantasy element of romance. We're allowed to sort of forgive him for his like staunch capitalistic ways, and the fact that he softens a bit and he does want to provide good working conditions, and he wants to find to have that sort of genial intercourse with his workers, meaning that he wants to be friendly with them and not have sort of the heated exchanges that we see at the beginning of the miniseries. That certainly softens and is shown through his relationship with Nicholas Higgins. However, I still think it's a hard sell for, at least for me personally in 2021, to be really rooting for the capitalist. So it's sort of, it does become a fantasy element there, where we have somebody who can both be pro-business and pro-profit, and also be considered a sympathetic figure. By the end of the miniseries, we have many interesting things happening. Mr. Thornton's business has failed, taking away his only claim to his high social standing. However, he maintains his integrity by making the choice to avoid a risky investment because it could result in harm to his workers. And Margaret is now an heiress, restoring her to her rightful position in Victorian society. Margaret could continue living in London, but she doesn't. Instead, she returns to the north with the intention of making a business proposition to Mr. Thornton. She wants to invest her inheritance in the mill, and she tries to emphasize how this makes financial sense to her and is not a romantic decision at all. It's rather unconvincing. This is the final way in which class struggle collides with the romantic plot. We have the structure of a proposal, except it's a business proposition, and we have Margaret as the one talking about interests and investments. It signals to Mr. Thornton that she has accepted his world, and that perhaps it means she has accepted him. Finally, so the romantic reconciliation coincides with embracing the new class structure. Except that I always find it interesting that Mr. Thornton, who symbolizes what a man could achieve through hard work and determination, two of the foundational myths of capitalism, is saved by what's essentially the old way of the world, Margaret inheriting money she did nothing to earn. Margaret happens to love him for who he is, how he treats her, her family, and those around him, his intervention with the inquest, and for his integrity and tenacity, in other words, for who he is as a man. His good character is rewarded in the end, which signals to me that Gaskell wants us to think Mr. Thornton is a person worthy of respect and admiration, but she still has him failing and needing rescuing. Is it an acknowledgement that the new class structure brought on by the Industrial Revolution is still competing with this old wealth, or is it a compromise through their romance at bringing together and therefore eroding the already tenuous class divisions finally? I'm curious to know what you think about the ending and what viewers or readers can take away from it. Also, I know there were other moments where the class tension between Margaret and Mr. Thornton was very evident. I chose to focus on the most extreme examples. Feel free to think about or tell me about the ones you noticed. So in conclusion, the romance is telling an equally important narrative about class renegotiation. The romantic tension is built through the class conflict between Mr. Thornton and Margaret Hale, and is only resolved after Margaret learns to love Mr. Thornton and thereby accept the new social structure. This sort of social renegotiation is constantly happening on a micro and macro level socially. And in particular, we are living in a time of renegotiating our own social standards, especially when it comes to racial and economic justice. I think that's why this story continues to resonate. It's familiar, it's interesting, and it can be talked about in a multitude of ways. Thanks for listening, and I hope to hear some of your thoughts.